Looks like things are slowing down. Everybody's here. Folks are here that are going to be here on time. Good morning and welcome to our webinar on the Simplified Flexible Path Policymaking. First, I want to let you know you received a notice, but just to be super clear, we will be recording this session and we'll post it online after the webinar is over. My name is Misty Bruceri, and I'm the coordinator for the Utilities Reach Codes program, which is part of the statewide Codes and Standards program. The Reach Codes program supports jurisdictions that wish to adopt local ordinances with tools and resources that help facilitate the process. One of the main resources that the program produces are cost effectiveness studies that support all the assumptions in the ordinance. And those are done statewide to avoid duplication and all the additional unnecessary expense of doing them repeatedly at a local level. But the studies tend to be a bit complex, and there's some interpretation required to develop a policy based on the results. And so we developed the Cost Effectiveness Explorer tool, which really helps you to facilitate that process. It allows you to review the results of various studies that are available and quickly determine the opportunities that are available in your jurisdiction, looking at just your jurisdiction results, and then create the structure for a policy. It's a much more streamlined process than just trying to do it on your own. So it really gives you that ability to translate all of those statewide results into the impacts in your jurisdiction. And so today we're going to review and learn a little bit about the features that we've been working on and how to create a flexible compliance policy for existing single-family homes. I'm here today with Neil Desnew from Clean Energy Policy Advisors. He's one of our Reach Code subject matter experts and has done a lot of work on this policy process. And also with Jasmine Krause from Policy Studio, who is our Explorer developer. They actually developed this tool. So I'm going to kick things off, and then I'm going to turn it over to Neil to provide an overview of the flexible path, the rationale, and the structure of the policy. Following that, Jasmine's going to provide an update regarding several changes to the Explorer that we've made to streamline the process. And then she'll walk through a process of developing an ordinance through, excuse me, with the Explorer. After Jasmine's done, we'll return to Neil for a wrap up and any questions and answers that you might have. I do want to say during the presentations, we will stop periodically at certain points to answer any questions. But if you have any while the presentation's in progress, please go ahead and put those in the chat and or raise your hand, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. We'll be monitoring that while the presentation's ongoing. Before we begin, we have a couple of questions that we'd like to ask you. Since there's not many of us, we're going to do this in a little bit of an informal way rather than doing a poll. We're just going to ask that you raise your hand if the answer is yes to the questions that I ask. There's just 3, and it should be pretty easy. There's a little hand symbol up usually at the top in the little menu bar up at the top of the screen in most cases that all you have to do is click the hand and that'll raise your hand if you don't know already. Okay, so the first question. Do you have a formal directive to investigate a reach code for existing buildings, like such as a council referral, or is it already part of your work plan? If that answer is yes, would you please raise your hand? And that is no one has that? Oh, wait, here we go. Okay, it was just going slow. Sorry about that. Okay. 3 folks on the call. Great, thank you very much. 4? Oh, there's a couple. Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Second, let's go to the next one. Alrighty, and have you used the Cost Effectiveness Explorer in the past? Okay, looks like we have a few folks that have used it. Excellent, and then several new people too as well. Okay, great. Thank you very much. And last question. Clear those. Have you used the Explorer for the FlexPath itself? We have just one person, Shannon. All right, great. Thank you, Shannon. Okay. And with that, thank you very much. We appreciate you guys answering our questions. We're just trying to make sure that we level set here and we're on the same page as everybody on the call. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Neil. Take it away, Neil.
Thank you, Misty. So before we get into the Explorer, I'd like to talk a little bit about reach codes for existing buildings. So there are a couple of methods of going about setting a reach code for existing buildings. One is a prescriptive method, which basically would provide applicants with a list of measures that have to be installed, either all of them or some of them. And all of these measures would have to be found cost effective. And there's no way to substitute one measure for another. If someone wanted to do something that was more extensive, they couldn't do it. They just have to do the things that are on the list. The other approach we're looking at is a menu-driven approach where applicants could choose from a list of measures that they could install that would achieve a level of energy savings, a floor level of energy savings. So this would allow applicants to select something that suits their particular project and their particular needs. So let's look at how that might appear to an applicant and a plan checker. So on this is a stylized version of what an applicant might submit and a plan checker might see at the permit desk. On the left is a set of measures that are available for installation and for credit for compliance. In the middle is a column labeled value, and that's the value that each measure would be applied to the project. So the value happens to correspond to energy. And then the final column is the credits that are claimed. So in this case, an applicant installed 5 measures, and the total value of those 5 measures is 24 points, which happens to be an equivalent value in terms of energy. And the score that they need to comply, to pass the ordinance, would be 24 in this case. And so they met the standard. They would comply. As you see, they could choose other measures to get there. They don't have to choose the measures they did. They could have a different situation. They could want to install windows instead and get 6 points instead of duct sealing and get 26 points. So there are a variety of different ways that could be used to do this. The other note is that this really applies to single-family homes and duplexes. It's most suited for that. So the reason that this has been developed is that it provides a method to achieve deep greenhouse gas savings in existing buildings. And it does that in a way that complies with federal and state requirements. Specifically, the federal laws require that energy codes, energy standards that are set by state and local governments must be based on energy consumption. They can't be based on greenhouse gases. And they also can't restrict the use of federally approved appliances. And at a state level, they must be shown to be cost effective. So this policy meets all those requirements. And it also does so in a way that's fairly simple for applicants and for the plan check staff. So before we get into how that's set up, we need to understand what the basis of the measures are. And as Misty mentioned earlier, the Codes and Standards program produces cost effectiveness studies for different types of buildings. And they produced one for existing buildings. And this study applies not just to buildings that are undergoing any kind of renovation, but they apply to flat out retrofit situations where each measure has been found cost effective or been evaluated for cost effectiveness based on its own merits. It's not part of another project or anything. And the scope covers energy efficiency, solar photovoltaic and battery storage, and electrification measures. And very importantly, it's specific to each climate zone and specific to 3 different vintages of buildings, ranging from pre-code buildings to early cycle energy code buildings to later cycle energy code buildings. And this is important because the values differ quite significantly based on climate zone and vintage. So you can basically tune a policy to be very specific and get the maximum amount of savings. It's important to understand that this supports a whole range of measures. The measures that are presented as cost-effective may not be the best package for each particular home. Existing homes vary a lot, and so just because it's cost-effective might not be the best solution for each particular home. The other thing that's of note here is that heat pumps have not been found to be cost-effective, but they do have significant greenhouse gas potential. So the flex path will offer, as we will see, will offer a pathway to capture those greenhouse gases from electrification measures without violating the federal and state standards. So let's dig into that a little bit. These two charts represent greenhouse gas savings from particular measures on the left and site energy savings on the right. Site energy is the energy that is metered at the building, right? It's not the energy that's used to generate the energy that's delivered to the building, but it's what the consumer pays for at their end. And what you will notice about this slide is that there is a reasonable correlation between greenhouse gas reductions and energy savings, particularly for the measures that save on gas, on natural gas, windows, duct sealing, and attic insulation, which are primarily heating measures, gas heating measures. There's pretty much a one-to-one correspondence. There's also the other significant thing to note about on this slide is that the heat pump measures are overwhelmingly large. They dwarf the other measures, and that's because they're very energy efficient, and they can provide a lot of greenhouse gas savings and energy savings. This is, by the way, just for one particular climate zone and one particular vintage. We'll get into how to look at this for other vintages and other climate zones when we look at the Explorer. So how to use this information to develop a policy. As I mentioned earlier, there's a target score that you choose measures from a menu to achieve a particular target score. And that target score must not exceed the sum of cost-effective measures. So in this stylized example, we see that the cost-effectiveness study for this particular climate zone and this particular vintage found that a PV system, attic insulation and air sealing, and duct sealing were all cost-effective. And in fact, they would save the consumer, the homeowner, about 20 million BTUs of energy per year. So 20 million BTUs, that's jargon. Well, we call it 20 points. So 1 million BTUs is equivalent to about 1 point. So in this case, you could set a target of up to 20, right? And you could require the applicant to install measures that would save 20 points or 20 million BTUs. They could install these 3 measures and get done. Or they could install a range of other measures. Now, as you see, similar to the pie charts, that heat pumps save a lot of energy. So they could install heat pumps and duct sealing, one heat pump and seal the ducts, and they'd be there. So in this chart, you could set the target score anywhere up to the cost effectiveness savings, but we're not necessarily recommending that you choose the maximum, because there may be reasons on existing homes to choose a lesser value and give people a little bit more flexibility. And the Explorer is going to help us go through that process and understand how that works. So I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine, but before I do, I'd like to stop and see if there are any questions about what's been covered so far. A lot of this will be covered in more detail through the Explorer, but we should stop here and see if there's any questions.
There's no questions in the chat yet. Any questions from the group? Oh, here we go. From Tom Cabot, Neil, does the cost effectiveness tool apply to simple burnout replacement?
The cost effectiveness tool did evaluate the replace on burnout, and it found that those are not necessarily cost effective. But again, under the flex path, you could allow someone to install a heat pump appliance upon burnout or earlier and give them credit for that. But you can't make it a simple requirement under the prescriptive pathway.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Jasmine, take it away.
Awesome. So I will share slides over here. Okay, does that look good, Misty?
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks, Neil. I'm excited to share our newest feature, which is a simplified redesign of flexible paths and existing building policies. So here's a quick look at what I'm going to go over. So we'll start with a reminder of what flexible paths used to look like and how we've redesigned that. Then we'll address some changes that have occurred across the Explorer due to this change, including changes to your policy option templates and transitioning your old policies over to this new redesign. And finally, we'll walk through creating a flexible policy from scratch together. So I know only one of you raised your hands for having created a flexible policy before, but this was the original layout. So here you would create a prescriptive policy first, and then flexible compliance was housed in that policy, but under a separate tab. And with the redesign, we've simplified this concept. And now for both policy configurations, you can view them and set them up from the same page. So you can set the compliance methods right up here with toggles at the top of the screen. This is the same spot where you can set your required flexible score. Down here on your measure list, you can set individual measures that you want to make mandatory. And on the left-hand column, there's these little minus symbols, and this is where you could also remove any measures that you aren't interested in having available to permit applicants. The same screen, we also have an option for setting your cost effectiveness calculation method. So on-bill is generally going to be the best fit for most of you, but in some edge cases, you may want to allow on-bill or TDV, and you can do that via the drop-down selector there. So with this new format, there's some changes that have echoed across the site that we want to point out to you. One of which is on policy options. So now you'll see one policy option that's prescriptive, where we've selected cost-effective measures for you. Another policy option that's flexible, where we've set a required flexible score for you. And one option that chooses your requirements later. So in case you don't know which compliance method is going to work best for you or you're most interested in, you can explore your options from that screen, see all the measures in front of you, see their energy savings, and see what route you'd like to take, basically. So, and as always, once you've selected your policy option from this page and created your policy, you can go in and you can adjust assumptions and change your requirements as you'd like. So if you have an existing policy from before we implemented this change and you go to open it, you're going to see this message pictured here pop up. So this is just to make sure that we're preserving all of the hard work that you put into your policy. So basically, to summarize this, if you previously created a policy that was focused on mandatory measures, you'll just select the prescriptive method. If you had set a target score and configured a flexible table, then you'll select the flexible method. And if you're unsure, if it's been a while and you can't quite remember, just select both options. Then you can open them both, take a look and see which one looks best to you. And if you end up with an extra policy that you don't actually want to keep, you can always delete it later from your My Policies page. So it doesn't hurt to just select both. So now I'm going to move over to creating a flexible policy and doing a walkthrough on the Explorer Live. So let me open. So Eric, if you can pop the link in the chat, if you want to go to, you did it perfect, explorer.localenergycodes.com and join me. If you have the screen space to open a window and join me, please do. You'll end up with your own flexible path policy at the end, but no worries if not. We're recording this and it'll be available to you, so you can always follow along later. And if you're following along and at any point have any technical difficulties or questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll follow up with you. Awesome. So from this link, we're dropped into our homepage. And there's two options for how you want to access your policy options from here. So you can always access it from the sidebar on the left where it says policy options, or from the homepage, you can go to this card and click explore policy options. So I'm going to do that one. And I'll type in Palm Springs for this. If you're following along, just type in your jurisdiction's name. Awesome. So then we have this divided by construction types. I'm going to go to existing buildings. And this is where you can see those policy options that I outlined before. So I'm going to select our flexible option here. And then you heard Neil say that this typically works best for single family homes. So I'll deselect multifamily. This is also if you only wanted it to apply to one climate zone, you could make that edit here. And then I'll name my policy. And then click Create a Policy. And once you get to the screen, we've generated the policy for you. So you just need to click See My Policy, and that will open it up. So here we're on our policy requirements page, and this shows us the building types, climate zones, and vintages that our policy covers. So to start, I'm going to open pre-1978. And then I can see that it's already set up a flexible compliance path for me. So the maximum score that's allowed is 58 based on-bill cost effectiveness. And so we've automatically set it to that. But one of the first steps you might want to take is going down here and taking a look at the available measures and the flexible score that they have. So when looking down here, I might, as Neil mentioned, want to lower this required flexible score to something that's a little less difficult for permit applicants to reach. So I can just type it in there and then it's set. Some other options here are if I knew that I wanted to make the water heating package mandatory to all permit applicants, I could just click that toggle there and you'll see it also pop up here at the top. Along those same lines, if I knew that I wanted to remove a measure like air sealing, I can click this little minus symbol and it will remove it. One thing to note here is if you're removing measures or making them mandatory and they're used to calculate that maximum cost-effective score, you'll see like what just happened is there'll be two scores here instead of one then. One which is going to show the case where if you hadn't removed any measures or made them mandatory, this is the max possible. And then the maximum using available flexible measures. So based on the actions that you just took, what is possible now at this point in time. So these are just here as kind of signposts and guides for you to keep in mind. Now, while I have one measure required here, I can exit out of this vintage, clicking the X here. And this is where you would go back, and if you wanted to add measures or adjust scores across other vintages and climate zones, you can do so. But with that one measure selected to mandatory, I can go up to this impact tab. And it's right now going to say impact for flexible policies is under construction. So we're working on getting this ready for you and showing the impact of not only mandatory measures, but also the flexible score that you've set. So we're working on this, and there's some other things also coming soon, including these documents available. Currently, they mainly support the mandatory measures, but we're working on getting them also available for flexible. And I know the model ordinance is also being updated. We also have a set of new single family new construction results that we're importing to the Explorer now, hoping to have them up in a week or two. So if you have any questions or need help, you can always reach out to us. My email is jasmine@policystudio.co, which I think Eric's going to drop in the chat. But I also want to point out, if you get stuck at any place, we have this little symbol at the bottom of the page, and it'll show up site-wide. And you can click here, and that is my face. You can search articles. You can send us a message, and I am the one that will receive the message and can respond. And also, if this seemed a little overwhelming, or you have questions, or you want to see what other features the Explorer supports, you can also schedule a one-on-one walkthrough with me through this button, and we can take 15 minutes and just go through the Explorer. So I think that's it for me. Misty, are there any questions before I hand it back over to Neil?
There is a question in the chat. I think I can answer this one, though. It's not actually about the Explorer itself. It's about a study from
Awesome.
Hannah Kornfeld. And she asks, will you be adding existing non-residential building data to the site? And yes, we have a study that's being updated now. I'm actually supposed to get the draft of that next week. So we are wrapping up the study now, and we will be adding that as soon as the data is available from the study. And it looks like we have one hand up. Garrett, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm feeling like I'm getting confused. I think I've been in too many reach code calls, but the flexible score, is that the same or different than the TDR compliance score that we're talking about for new construction?
Jasmine, you want to take that, or would you rather I?
Yeah, I can take it. Yes. Or do you want to? Either one.
Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, they're different. The flexible score we're specifically using in existing single family as an option instead of the mandatory measures. Misty, do you want to build off that?
Yeah, and the points for each measure are based on the site energy savings. They're not based on TDV or any of the code stuff at all. They're
Okay.
calculated entirely based on site energy savings. We convert it all to BTU.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And so is flexible score also, I guess you probably go into this in the second part of the presentation when you're talking about like what does an applicant see, what does the plan checker see in this process, right? Like how do flexible scores get calculated for projects and how would they evaluate them?
Okay, yeah, so the applicant would see a checklist that shows, as a matter of fact, Jasmine, you could probably show that from the flexible compliance screen. I can show that if you guys don't have it handy.
I can get there.
Okay, sorry about that. So they would see a checklist with the list of measures and the points available for each, and then what the target is, something like this. So they would not see the claimed section, right? There would be no points in that yet, but they would have to reach a certain target, in this case 24, and they would have a list of measures from which to choose with the points associated with each. And those points again are based on the energy savings. So more site energy savings, more points. And then they would choose from this list which measures they would like to install to meet that target.
And
Does that make sense?
Garrett, to build off of that, if I think I get what you're asking, unlike new construction, the values that the permit applicant earns for each measure are not recalculated at the time of permit application. These are for simplicity because of the context of existing buildings. The values for each measure are fixed for the duration of the policy and no matter which project you're on. So it makes it really simple for the permit applicant and the plan checker to add 1 + 6 = 7 and not have to model anything. Those values will always be the same.
And are these compliance forms that are there templates, or are these ones that we would create?
We do have templates, yes. We have a template checklist And also there's a guide, a reference document that goes with that that talks about all of the specifics for each measure and things like that too. So we do have templates that you would probably edit. Usually requires that they be edited to some degree for the specifics for you. Does that make more sense, Garrett?
Yeah, thank you. I was like totally disoriented with the, making numbers go up versus making numbers go down because we're, now in the existing building field.
That's right. You're looking for a lower number in the existing building or in new buildings, new construction. Yeah, the code is fun sometimes. But this, we tried to make it as simple as possible, and it's not based on the software or anything like that. It's just a hand calc after you comply. Okay, and then there's a question from Tom in the chat about the conversion between kWh and gas and therms to BTU. And yes, Tom, you are exactly right. 1 point is about 10 therms or 1 million BTU. And that's site energy, so that's the savings. So we just took the savings that the study calculated and converted that to BTU and then assigned points to each one. So that also can help the permit applicant understand which measures might have the most impact when they're making their selections. Does that make sense? Okay. I didn't do the, Tom, I saw that you have a calc there. I didn't do the calc in my head. I'm sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I assume you did. The calc on a calculator, and that's the correct conversion.
Yeah, I'm just checking to see it's really just the metered energy. It has nothing to do with the power plants or the electric power policy. It's just metered right there. Okay.
Yep. Just
Thanks.
for, and the idea being that this is consistent with the consumer's experience. This is what a homeowner would see. They pay their utility bill, right? And so we're looking at savings on that bill. Energy saving.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions or? Feel free to ask if you have any, really. This is a great time. We've got Jasmine and Derek here. They can explain some of the rationale behind things.
So, Misty, this is Tom again. I thought I'd back up to my early question about is the tool useful for developing policies on simple burnout? And it's sounding like probably not, because a simple burnout replacement doesn't have a package of other measures. And so if somebody goes from a burnt out gas furnace to a heat pump, they've probably generated a number of points, but they have nothing to use them on. And
you're probably right. You're probably right about that, Tom. You're right. I think with a replace on burnout, you don't want them to replace it with other measures. They've got to replace the piece of equipment. But no, this is really more for bigger projects.
Yeah. So for whole remodels,
alterations,
yeah,
additions, all that kind of stuff. Exactly.
Yeah. Unless maybe if somebody had a policy where the points generated were bankable and usable in a future remodel, then maybe they would want to go towards a heat pump replacement on burnout and use their points to allow them to do additional things in a remodel later.
That's exactly right, Tom. This is Neil. An applicant can take credit for measures that are already installed, and we'll be talking about that in a minute. So if someone replaces their water heater when it burnt out and they put in a heat pump water heater, and then they decide to do a remodel 5 years later, they can get credit for that, and that would add to their points. So it creates a natural incentive for replace on burnout, but it doesn't necessarily substitute for a replace on burnout policy.
We did do a little bit of analysis on about 10 buildings in climate zones 2 and 3 that I can share with the group if you like, that it shows for each one of these, they were real projects. exactly what the project needed to do in order to meet an ordinance requirement at different levels. There's 2 different levels it shows. So kind of give you an idea of what it would require of each project. Jasmine, I had a question for you about the Explorer itself. I noticed when you were displaying the requirement screen that from my perspective, oftentimes I would want to do a screen capture of that. And I'm wondering if there's some way I could rearrange things so that it has exactly the information I want on the screen, because what I didn't see was like the energy savings, and I would want to see that. Is that something you could show us? Because I think there is a way to do it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me move back here. If I go back to the policy I just created and open this.
Yeah, this is where it was.
Yeah, so from here, perfect. So there's a lot of data here that you can scroll and see, but also if you want to go ahead, you can go up here on the right-hand side to add hide columns. Select that, and then you can basically click and include any columns that you want. You can remove ones that you don't want, and say that you're most interested in, out of these, the emissions reductions. You can, it will glitching on me a little. You can move these around basically, or if you're most interested in citywide, you can move them. I think with the screen share, it's
going a little slow. I think it's not letting you grab.
Yeah.
But I see the hand. It looks like, so you can just grab it and place it where you want? Is that normally what happens there?
For these white lines, you can rearrange them within this per home results category. And if you want to move this entire per home results category, you can also do it. You click on these little dots on the right and drag them. And we have also subsidy needed per home and citywide down here, the citywide impacts. So if you wanted any of these to be moved closer to the front so that you wanted to see them more easily, you can do that.
Okay.
And if you also wanted to adjust any assumptions, you can do that here as well from edit assumptions.
Okay. There's a lot of assumptions to adjust there. I know that. And you can really customize this for your jurisdiction, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in theory, I could then, if we were on a shared screen, we could actually set this up to display, to just get rid of all of these per home results on the screen and just display citywide results.
Yeah, easily. I can actually do that because it doesn't require moving anything around.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then here you can do this, and I'm on a laptop screen, so if you have a bigger monitor, you could really have everything up right in front of you.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add in here, if I can, for a moment, what I like about this screen, what Jasmine just did, is the emissions reductions that are shown here. Those are based on the assumptions for what your city's renewable energy supply, grid supplied energy is at, and you can adjust that. And you can also adjust not just where it's at today, but you can adjust the rate at which it's going to progress towards 100% in the future. So that where the default assumption is we assume that this will get to 100% by 2045. But if your jurisdiction is going to get there in 2030, you can go ahead and change that. And then these emissions reductions values here on screen will automatically recalculate. And then from there, when you're looking at the options that you want to offer your permit applicants, you can take a look and say, well, if some of my measures that I'm offering don't have a lot of emissions reduction savings and some really do, you can decide to exclude the ones that don't get you as much mileage. And that's kind of the more advanced way, but the real power of now being able to configure this menu and the options that permit applicants can see while you're looking at the impacts in real time.
Have to be mindful though, as you exclude measures, you're reducing flexibility. So there's a balance to reach there, right? Okay. Well, one of the features that I find just the most wonderful thing in the Explorer is the little I buttons that appear everywhere. Could you tell us a little bit about those, Jasmine?
Yeah, so you'll find the I buttons on really a range of items and places. You'll see them on a lot of headings and next to a lot of terminology and next to the measures. So for instance, next to Windows, you can click in here and you'll find a description of the measure, and more info will give you a really long description with lots of details that we pulled from the studies. If you're ever unsure about what this component does, like require specific measures, you can click and we have a brief explanation there. And we also have it like for the maximum cost-effective score area. So if you ever find yourself lost, not quite sure what a button does, what a column means, just click on the I icon and you should find the information that you need. So.
Okay, great, thank you. And if not, then we click on the little thing in the bottom, right? To
Yes.
ask you?
Yeah, right down here. You can ask me, or you can also search for help right here, and it'll search our articles that are already available too. So lots of options.
Great. Okay, any more questions about how to create a policy or any of the features in the policy? Okay, Tom, you had just a comment. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm really appreciative of that ability to customize the emissions on the tool. That was one of the things I was looking for in prior examples, and it does let cities reflect, their level of sophistication in figuring out what these things do, because even folks like ICLEI don't seem to look upstream properly, or they look upstream in a biased way, only on electricity, not on fossil fuels, things like that. So I'm really appreciative of you putting this in there, and then coming up with the idea of, it may make sense to have a list of, what are those factor values supported by different organizations, and so you could show, here's what ICLEIs would look like. Here's what, somebody who understands the Permian gas basin and its relation to California having 3 times the leakage of the average. So, all these different ways a city can see the emissions impact of improving their policy.
Great suggestion. Thank you. As always. All right, Gary?
Thank you. Is there a way, because right now the way that this, at least what I'm seeing right now, it's segmented by climate zone and then building vintage. Is there a way to see all of that in totality? Like if you were to have a policy that covers all climate zones, all vintages in your community, would you see kind of like the total impact of that?
We're working on getting that up and running right now. We're just doing some calculations to make sure the methodology is solid before we get that live for you guys.
Do we have an ETA on that, Jasmine? Sorry to put you on the spot. Just generally.
Yeah, I would guess a month or 2.
Okay, by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that wraps up the questions, unless there's any others. I don't see any in the chat. Go ahead and go back to Neil to give us a little summary.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. That was a great walkthrough. Looks like you've made lots of great improvements. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here so we get on the same page. And you can all see that now. Misty?
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you. So a couple of important considerations. One, the cost effectiveness study that this is based on is being updated. This is an unusual thing. We don't normally update cost effectiveness studies in the middle of a code cycle, but there have been some pretty significant changes, most notably new electric feed-in tariffs and related tariffs. And so we are updating the analysis. The results are expected soon, and they will be incorporated into the Explorer. It may change the results a bit, but in the meantime, I think you can go through and work with the Explorer and examine what might be happening in your community and how to design a policy. And then when the final numbers can come in, you can confirm the values that you may want to use. There's some other things that need to be considered as you're developing a policy. Jasmine talked about the vintages, but I think it's worthwhile taking a closer look at what impact vintages can have in different communities. So let's take a look at 3 different cities. The first happens to be Albany, California. This is a older suburban community that's largely built out. And as you see, most of the housing stock in this first column was built before the energy code was in place. So it's all pre-1978. There's very little new housing. So in this case, you may want to simply design a policy that limits it to the older vintages and ignore the newer vintages. It makes it very simple. You don't have to check on the vintage of most homes when they come into the plan check, and you can set a fairly high target score because there's a lot of opportunities. It does simplify things. In another case, you might have a newer community. This is the city of Elk Grove, which was incorporated in 2001. It's a suburb of Sacramento. And here, there are mostly newer homes. So you may want to design a policy and simplify the policy that basically applies the same standard to all buildings, but that standard be based on the newest vintage so that you don't have 3 different target scores for the entire community. You just have one. And it, again, simplifies the process and affects most of the homes in that community. And then there may be cases like the city of Irvine, California, which is basically a balanced distribution of vintages. And here, your policy might be best to basically have a separate set of standards, a separate target score for each vintage so that you can optimize the savings that you're achieving. So these are things that you can look at in the Explorer. When you're working with the Explorer, you can look at the impacts of changing your policy by applying it to a certain vintage, by applying different target scores to different vintages, and you can see what the results will be, so you don't have to guess. So we've covered vintages. The next thing I would like to talk about is trigger events. So when would this apply? The model ordinance provides some suggestions, some text that can help you sort through things, but basically there's a few different trigger events. One is the scope of the project. Does it apply to additions of a certain size, structural alterations, that is, modification of exterior walls or sill plates, or maybe a combination of permit types. If you get a mechanical, plumbing, and electrical permit together, maybe that would trigger the thing. Or it could be based on valuation, any projects over a certain value, or even a hybrid where you have a certain scope of a certain valuation. So there are different options. This can be developed by the community. It doesn't have to be statewide. So you can determine what's best for your community. The next item I'd just like to briefly cover, we talked about the target score and not setting it too high. I think you want to set a target score that's going to be achievable for the typical project. And when you've set the target score, you may want to look at what that might require of a typical home. So you could set it up in Explorer and then set a target score and examine what measures would get you there. Are those the measures that you would like your community to, your applicants to install to get there? And you could raise it up a bit and make a higher bar. You could lower it a little bit so that you start getting the types of measures that meet your objectives. Then there are credits. We talked briefly about credits for existing measures. They can be offered. Some measures can be verified by a HERS rater. Typically, if a home is going through a renovation and they're claiming credit for a state required measure, that would get a HERS rater verification. Building inspectors can also verify measures that are installed. Heat pumps are very easy to identify. So these can all apply. So you can apply. Applicants can basically not be penalized for doing measures in advance. And finally, we talk about mandatory and conditional measures. Jasmine mentioned that you could make certain measures mandatory. So typically like low-hanging fruit measures such as lighting packages or the hot water package might be worthwhile making mandatory and just having everybody do that and then achieve the score on top of that. And then conditional measures. You may also include requirements that roof alterations or re-roofing meet the cool roof standard, the higher cool roof standard that's in the code. Or you may require that alterations such as remodeling of kitchens or bathrooms or laundry rooms require electric readiness. Or you could require that the PV credit that's offered be contingent upon having certain electric readiness measures installed as well. So what does this do? To wrap up, what we have here is a policy that can help achieve greenhouse gas reductions in existing homes. And the Explorer can take out a lot of the complexity of that process. There are a lot of numbers to go through, but the Explorer gives you the flexibility to examine things in different scenarios and set up a policy that is very specific to your community and your climate zone to optimize your objectives. And we're also here to help. We've got model codes and implementation materials and checklists online. And we're here also to help you if you have questions or you need specific analysis done to support your policy. Please contact us. That's what the Codes and Standards program is here for. And we'd like to hear from you and help you go through this process. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Misty for some further discussion and questions, and thank you for listening.
Alrighty. Thank you both, Neil and Jasmine. Most appreciated. We do have one question in the chat, and Tom, I'm not sure I know the answer to this. Can the retail rates time series be made transparent to the user? I'm not sure I understand that. I apologize. Could you help me out with that a little bit?
Yeah, that's fancy talk for can you show the rates over time? That
The escalation rates and things like that?
Yep. And right, and then the second part of the question is, would there be a way for the jurisdiction to substitute their estimates of the rates over time?
Okay. We don't show it in the tool, and we don't have a way to do that in the tool, but we do have all of the source data available through the study, and we post a spreadsheet with all of our results data and stuff like that. So we could work on that. If there's something in particular that you're looking for back behind that, I can also work with the team and get that to you. We don't have a way to play with rates in the tool, though. Sorry. That's a pretty complicated one.
All right, thanks.
Sorry. Any other questions?